Sean Deveney, Sporting News, NBA writer, going to join us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline to break it all down. Pete Thompson has LeBron James, 44, even series, but Kyle Korver, your guy, man.
That's right. He looked like the Kyle Korver of old last night. Look, he's 37. He looked 27, diving on the floor for loose balls, knocking down threes. Like, his email once upon a time used to be K3s, please, at like Hotmail. It's not anymore, so I don't feel uncomfortable sharing that. But it was K3s, Treez, please. And then he spelled that Pleez.
Yeah, we were up at the Sixers Cavs game this year, and we were in the Cavs locker room, and Pete's standing there with me, and sure enough, Kyle Korver walks up. He's like, to Pete, he says, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah, it's always great. Literally every time he sees me, he's like, "What the heck are you doing here?" I'm thinking, I am a credentialed member of the media, sir.
I still have a job, somewhat.
Right.
I'm working here. No, we're not working. We're having fun. Sean Deveney covers the NBA for the Sporting News, and he joins us now with a 2-2 Eastern Conference series, Sean, as the Cavaliers, you kind of felt that they were going to get back into the series, but if you're a Celtic fan and you watch that 2 games in Cleveland, are you concerned with it coming back to Boston?
Yeah, on one hand, I would say yes, just because they, obviously in Game 3 they looked terrible. I thought they put up a good fight last night, but what would worry me is that, even when they were putting up that fight, they could never really get closer than 6-7 points, and certainly not close enough to take the lead. Cleveland just was in control of that game, even though it was a closer game. So that concerns me. The thing that wouldn't concern me, though, is that you still have home court advantage, and in the first round the Celtics went through this against Milwaukee, where they lost the 2 games on the road pretty much the same way that they lost to Cleveland, where they got blown out in the first game, and the second game that they have a comeback and make it a tighter game. So it's certainly history repeating itself, but at the same time, look, this is the Cavs, it's not the Bucks. So there's certainly plenty of cause to be concerned if you're a Celtics fan.
Yeah, and I mean, in the Sixers series, the Celtics did a really good job of not showing their youth. You had a lot of young guys really contributing, but are you starting to see a little bit of that here in this Cavs series, or is it just, hey, LeBron James, man, that's the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story?
Yeah, I think there's a combination there. Obviously, what LeBron does is always going to be difficult for any team to put up with. But when you look at Game 3, certainly they didn't play like themselves, and I thought they got rattled last night. There's a couple of missed dunks there, Jaylen Brown, and when you miss dunks like that on the road, you can react to it in a couple of ways. You can come back down and knock down a 3 or knock down a jumper, or you can let it rattle you a little bit, and they seem to let those things rattle them. Block shots, you mentioned Korver. I think the couple block shots that he had might have been the most impressive plays of his postseason so far. But yeah, it seemed like when the Cavs got those kinds of plays, the Celtics let it get to them, and that's certainly the sign to me of a young team that still hasn't got this thing figured out.
Yeah, you look at the role players of Cleveland. They really let them down in the 2 games in Boston. But if they get anything from those guys and the way LeBron's playing right now, do you think that Cleveland can win the game in Boston?
Yeah, I mean that's been the real difference here is how the sort of the rest of the team has played at home and on the road. If you get certainly if you get some shooting out of either Korver or J.R. Smith, then and they didn't really get much of either in the first 2 games, then they become that much more difficult to beat. If you can get something out of George Hill, I thought he didn't have a great final stat line in Game 3, but the way he played in that first quarter, the way he really helped them jump out to that lead in the first quarter, I thought George Hill was really important in that game. So yeah, I mean if they're getting things out of those guys, and if I think Tristan Thompson and Larry Nance have done a pretty good job in terms of the way they've handled Al Horford, and Horford's so important important, as you guys know, to what the Celtics do. That if you have those two guys playing defense the way they've been, that combination that's going to open up some chances for Cleveland to let LeBron win it. And that's the real thing here is they can't fumble things so badly that LeBron doesn't have a chance to win it. And if they can just play pretty well, then that'll be enough for LeBron, who loves playing in the Boston Garden, to come in and win one of these games.
Sean, were the turnovers a concern for you with the Cavs? 19 turnovers, 2 assists in the second half. Is that something, especially going into a hostile environment like Boston, that could be exacerbated?
Yeah, and that's been a problem for them in the first 2 games, and really the Celtics did a great job taking care of the ball in both of those games. But that's been something, again, the Celtics, with the way they played at home, with what is it, 9 straight wins, I believe, on their home floor in the playoffs. That's been they've been very good at forcing turnovers. They've been very good at limiting their turnovers. So yeah, that's something that if you're Brad Stevens, I think you take out your highlighter and you circle that number and remind the team that coming back to the Garden, that's something that you want to see again.
How about Coach Brad Stevens and the starting lineup? He elected to go with the same guys, although he was a little coy about it in the pregame availability. I promise you, we're going to start 5 guys. Was about all that he would reveal. Does he need to make a change in the starting 5, or do you think because they held their own?
Yeah, and I think that's something that everybody was expecting, because if you go back over the course of the postseason, that's something that he's done where he's seen a deficiency. He's gone ahead and made a change. I think a lot of people thought he would start, myself included, thought he would start Aaron Baines. I mean, he comes in with Aaron Baines pretty early on in the game anyways, but just to, like I mentioned, the job that Thompson and Nance have done on Horford, if you have Baines in there, that kind of that mucks up that defensive that defense that Cleveland can throw out there. So I thought he might do something like that, and we might still see a change. I think one of the real problems they have is that 1-3 pick and roll that Cleveland does so well, where George Hill and LeBron run the pick and roll. You saw a number of times where it was LeBron James going up against Terry Rozier, and that was a matchup that the Cavs just kept hammering. And I think if you're Brad Stevens, you got to find an answer to that. So I'll be interested to see if there's something that he does in terms of the lineup or whatever to help limit that, because that you can't keep having Terry Rozier trying to guard LeBron James. It's just not going to work.
Now, Sean, I saw on SportsCenter last night Mark Jackson talking about how when he was a young player, it was difficult to play well on the road in the playoffs and in the postseason. Can you dig deeper into the struggles of why the Celtics young players are having trouble on the road games this postseason?
Well, I mean, this is all new for them, I mean, it really is. Even the guys who have been around, like Rozier, he played a little bit in the playoffs last year, but not much. Jaylen Brown didn't play much, and of course Jason Tatum's a rookie. And these guys are, they're being asked to do quite a bit. Even Semi Ojeleye, who sort of in and out of the lineup, he's sort of like the 8th man in this rotation. He's a guy who, he's a rookie himself. So I mean, I think that's part of it is just the inexperience. But I do think that, as I mentioned before, I think that they have gotten rattled. What they do requires such focus, because the way they play defense, their defensive system really requires that everybody be exactly where they're supposed to be at all times. And I think you see that break down. Like I say, they'll have a bad play on offense, they'll miss a dunk, they'll get blocked, and then on the defensive end they'll lose focus, and you'll see a wide open lane. I think it was right after they blew one of those breaks and missed a dunk, that the Cavs came right back down and had a fast break, and it was just such a big swing. But that's the kind of thing that happens when you're a young team on the road that you don't see happening when they play at the Garden.
Is Marcus Smart one of the key players for Boston in your mind? Because the image that I have from last night is when LeBron basically had a turnover to his own basket, right? I mean, he turned the ball over to himself and then basically was able to finish. And then Smart sitting on his rear end in the lane like, man, how do I stop this guy? But then there are other games where Smart's been able to D up on him.
And that's that gets back to what I was saying about the Terry Rozier thing, where they like running that pick and roll where they wind up, they force you to put a point guard on him. And if you're the Celtics, you're okay with that. If you don't want it to be Terry Rozier, but if it's Marcus Smart, you're okay with that, and because Smart usually does he's a strong guy, he's a smart defensive player, so the presumption is that he's going to be able to handle LeBron, and when he doesn't, you really do see that frustration because he knows that's why he's on the floor. That's why they let him take some of the dumb shots that he takes, because they know that what he gives you defensively is worth it. But when he's not able to do that, he really does become more of a negative player.
Yeah. And LeBron said last night, the postseason, all about finding mismatches. That's how you win. And it seemed that it's funny how on the road, the mismatches seem to be much more glaring.
That's again, like what the Celtics do, it really requires a certain mental focus, and I just think that these guys get shaken a little bit. It happened in the Milwaukee series as well. Didn't happen in the Philadelphia series so much as you got, but even the game that they won on the road, if you remember in Philadelphia, it was not a work of art. That was one where you could say that the Celtics played less worse than the Sixers. You know what I mean? That wasn't something where both teams played great. I just think that's what happens with this team, with these young guys. They get on the road, they get shaken, and they lose their assignments, and they lose track of what they're supposed to be doing defensively.
Yeah, and obviously, here's the challenge. Boston only has the one road win, which was not a pretty game, but they don't have to win a road game to win this series. However, can they realistically think that they can win a Game 7 against this version of LeBron James?
Well, here's the thing: is if you go back, I think 2013. This is I live in Boston. I know that everybody in Boston lives with this memory, and that is when the Celtics were up 3-2 on the Miami Heat. Things looked pretty good. They had some crazy wins. It looked like, hey, they're gonna upset the Heat and go to the finals. And LeBron goes into the TD Garden and just, 45 points, like 15, 16 rebounds. It was one of the greatest visiting performances you'll ever see in the history of the Celtics in the playoffs. And I think everybody remembers that around here. So when you're talking about these things, I think that memory kind of lingers with everybody here. So I don't think there's any doubt that folks here know what LeBron James can do on the road, in the Garden, in the playoffs, and that's the big fear, is that you can say, all right, well, the Celtics don't need to win a road game, but you can also say LeBron just needs to win one road game, and I think that's pretty imposing on the Celtics. Yeah,
that's a good point. Sean Deveney, Sporting News, is with us here, and you flip over to tonight's matchup. I don't know about you, Sean. I wasn't anticipating this series all that much like many were. I just don't feel the Rockets are in the same league as the Warriors. I don't know if that's cynical of me or not, but is this series showing that the Rockets are not in the same league as the Warriors?
Yeah, what it shows is that look, I think the Rockets can play with the Warriors. I think that they can make this an interesting series. I think there's things that they can do, but the problem is there's a checklist of 4 or 5 things, and every one of those has to go the right way. So you need a good game from Harden. You need, a pretty big game from Harden. You need a solid, 20-point kind of game from Chris Paul. You need that defense, guys like Ariza and PJ Tucker to be really locked in on Durant and do what they can to limit him. And then you need to get a little lucky with the shots that you don't have Klay Thompson to go off, you don't have Steph Curry to go off. If all those things happen, then you've got a chance to have a game. But the thing is, you can't. It's such a thin margin of error. You can't count on all those things happening all the time, and that's part of the problem for the Rockets here. I think they're capable of it, probably more capable than any team in the league. But the fact is that it's such a thin margin of error, and I think that's what's showing.
Sean, I think you hinted at it in that answer there, but after Curry's Game 3 performance, who do the Rockets need to focus on more defensively, KD or Steph Curry?
I still think it's Durant. I still think that when he's going, I think there's some aspect of guarding both Klay Thompson and Steph Curry that is it's not X's and O's, it's prayers and crossed fingers. That's all you can do is hope that those guys aren't knocking down 50% of the threes, because then you really don't have a chance. If they're shooting like human beings and in the in the 36-37% range, you've got a chance. So I think you really do try to take out Kevin Durant, and then with the other guys, like I say, it's a lot of hope that they're just not that they're knocking down those shots.
How about this one? Besides Harden and Chris Paul, who's the most important role player that can help the Rockets steal Game 4 in Oracle?
Well, I think it's probably Eric Gordon. I think he's a big X factor in the series, and he hasn't had one of those kinds of games where he goes 6 for 8 from the 3-point line. I think he's capable of doing that, and that's really one of the keys for them is if he's able to be the kind of guy who can go out and knock down those shots and stop a run. When the Warriors get on those long runs, that's what kills you. And if you can have a guy like him knocking down shots and stopping those runs, then I think he's probably the guy who might be best positioned to salvage this Game 4 here.
Mike D'Antoni says the Warriors have all the pressure. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I saw him say that, and I was scratching my head, and I said, well, if you're a coach, why not say that? Who wants to put more pressure on their team? So you can say that, but I don't know if anybody believes it. They certainly came in. Look, the Rockets came in with the best record in the league, and they came in going back to last summer with an intention of challenging the Warriors and trying to knock them off. If they get run out of the building tonight and go down 3-1, you kind of sit back and you say, well, what was it all for? Was it worth it? Are the teams that have gone out and said, you know what, we're going to plan for 3-4 years from now when maybe the Warriors are broken up, are those teams going to be proven right? And I don't think anybody really wants to see that, but it's certainly trending that way.
Yeah, 65 wins, number 1 seed. It seems that was very important to them, and they felt that that's the way that we can maybe compete, is if we get the home court and we're the number 1 seed, and that the 65 wins made people think that this series was going to be more enticing than it really was. But the Warriors just didn't care about the regular season nearly as much as the Rockets did. So the question would be, what happens to this Rockets team if they get knocked out in 5 games here? Like, where do they go from here?
Yeah, the good thing that they've got going for them, and the thing that Daryl Morey is going to try to lean on here is they've got the capability of going out and signing another free agent before they bring back their guys. Before they bring back a Chris Paul, for instance, or a Clint Capella. Both of those guys, Capella's a restricted free agent, but Chris Paul's a free agent. So they have the bird rights to those guys, so they can bring those guys back over the cap. But they'll be under the cap before that. So if they want to pursue a Paul George, if they want to pursue even LeBron, obviously that's come up. Then they have the capability of doing that. And we've seen the Rockets swing for the fences in the past and wind up with the guys that they wanted. Whether it's James Harden or Dwight Howard. Obviously that didn't work out, but they signed Dwight Howard when everybody else was trying to do that. So they're pretty good at making these pitches. So I think that we'll see much the same group, but perhaps with another big name added.
I hate to write the obituary for them at this stage because there are games left, but I think we all believe the inevitable is about to happen to them over the next couple of days. But if the Rockets are perpetually a 60-win, 65, 55-win team with James Harden, what do we look back at Harden eventually and say about him? Because a lot of people question, I've said before, I don't know if it's fair, Sean, to say that I don't view James Harden as the best player on the team that wins the championship. Now, is that just because we have so many mega super teams that he just, that's unfair? Or do you see him as a guy that could lead a team being the best player to a championship?
Yeah, it's a situation where he would need the right supporting cast around him. So, you know, I think that ideally he wouldn't be. I mean, that you go back to that Oklahoma City team that had Westbrook and Durant on it. You know, that obviously he was the number 3 player on that team, the 6th man on that team, and you know, that's a fantastic role, obviously, for him. You know, to be a second option. You know, if Oklahoma City could do it all over again and get rid of Westbrook and keep Durant and James Harden, now I think you're talking about a team that would have gone to several finals and really been you know, a much different, much better team. But yeah, you know, your point is well taken that if Harden is your best guy, then you're probably going to be a very good regular season team, but it's going to be tough for you to really win consistently in the playoffs.
Sean, no, Andre Iguodala possibly tonight might not play. Can the Rockets how will they take advantage of that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, I think that when you look at the benches, that Houston's bench with Eric Gordon, I think, is going to be a real key. So, you know, if that's something that Houston can find some depth there, then that's something that they'll be able to take advantage. You know, Iguodala is so good in terms of switching and things like that you also have to hope that you know, the one thing that we haven't seen from the Rockets that you'd like to see more, and part of the reason that you haven't is because of the length of the Warriors, is they're really good at running those pick and roll lobs for Clint Capella, and you know, with Iguodala being one of the guys who guards Harden, who can guard Chris Paul, you know, that kind of messes up their ability to run that play. But that's a very successful play for the Rockets that the Warriors have been able to take away. So maybe without Iguodala in there, that's something that they can get some cheap points on. And like I say, it's always, when you're playing the Warriors, it's always about how do you stop the run? How do you keep you know, a 6-0 run away from turning into a 13-0 run? You got to find ways to get easy points and to get big buckets. So, you know, that pick and roll play to Capella, if you don't have Iguodala in there, you have to think that maybe they'll have a few more chances to run that.
Longtime NBA writer Sean Deveney from the Sporting News. Couple quickies. When we look at this Warriors team, we're in the moment, but are we already saying this is a historically great run franchise team?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think there's any question that you know, just objectively look at the talent. You know, just forget how it all came together. Forget that Kevin Durant, you know, maybe took the easy way out in terms of joining this team. All that stuff, and just look at the level of. I mean, they have Steph Curry. Just what was it, 2 years ago? It was 2 years or 3 years ago, had one of the greatest seasons in the history. Like, nobody has ever shot the ball the way he did that year. And that was just a couple years ago. You have Kevin Durant, who is, you know, an MVP just a couple years ago. You have Klay Thompson, who's the number 1 option on most teams, is your third option. And you have a guy who's, you know, probably going to wrap up his career scoring 11, 12 points a game, but probably still be in the Hall of Fame because of what he does defensively and Draymond Green. And you've got, I mean, you have all those guys on the same team in their primes. This is not, you know, they're not 34, 35 at the end of the road. These are guys in their primes. I mean, it's really remarkable, and it's going to be a real challenge to break them up and knock them off in the next few years.
We'll let you play as part of our game. Yesterday, we asked the question: if you were starting a team, do you go Curry or Durant? Who are you taking?
And there's 4 of us in the studio. We split right down the middle.
You're the deciding vote, Sean. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would go with Durant. I mean, just the size. I mean, what he does defensively is really underrated, just with his length and athletic ability and his IQ on the defensive end. You know, I think that when you take that into account as well, and sort of the problems that Curry leaves you on the defensive end, they're able to make up for it because they have so many great defenders. But if I'm starting a team, I'd want to start with a guy like Durant.
Real quick, your story, Sporting News. I'm interested to hear what some of these executive weighing in on the Raptors, because I find that situation, you know, it's a shame because here's the number 1 seed. They have a great year, but nobody believes in them. They just locked these guys up. Where does a team like that go from here?
And, you know, they fire the coach, and that's just, it's such an impotent move. I mean, it's you're not doing anything by firing the coach. I mean, other than getting rid of a pretty good coach and possibly getting in somebody who's not as good. That's what you've accomplished. So they're going to look at the trade market. They've got to. They really only have 4 pieces, I think, that are worth it when you look at the way the contracts are set up, that are worth marketing. I think the guy who if anybody gets traded, it's going to be would be Kyle Lowry. I think that because he's only got 2 years left on the deal, because he has a certain grit and toughness that I think a lot of contending teams would be looking for. And like I say, it's an expensive deal. It's over $60 million for 2 years, but it's relatively short. Whereas DeRozan is a 3-year deal. Serge Ibaka still has 3 years. So I think that if anybody winds up moving there, it'll be Kyle Lowry.
Sean Deveney covering the NBA playoffs, and of course, check him out at the Sporting News. Follow him on Twitter at Sean Deveney, and the Sporting News NBA writer. We will have the Western Conference Finals for you tonight, followed by game number 5 tomorrow of the Eastern Conference Final. Sean appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, Sean.
Okay, thanks, guys.